Thanks a lot, and it is great to read here. Great to read as part of a great series, and to read in a great bookstore, and to read with a great friend who is a great poet. So, thanks. I'm going to read one poem from a book, but I'm going to read a bunch of new things mostly. I'm going to start off with a couple of prose poems, both of which came from dreams. This one I wrote yesterday morning when I woke up, and I haven't read it since, so we'll see what happens. It's called Regarding My Greatest Work. I have been asked many times in circumstances similar to these as I stood before an auditorium whose benches overflowed with enthusiastic listeners just like you, and upon whose rafters perched still more, how I came to write my greatest work, the Ark of the Pontoon. My arms extend from my shoulders like vacuum cleaner hoses, and I hold them like so with my hands palm up, as if to say, I take you all in, I welcome each of you into my world, come unto me. In this way I draw you into my dust basket, using my tremendous suction powers. It is not, you see, enough to simply be a good writer, you must also have impressive and unpredictable cleaning capabilities. I wrote The Ark of the Pontoon 27 years ago, and at that time my name was barely known in poetry circles. I had no idea that my work would arrive like an earthquake rattling the literary community of our country, and in translation those of countries beyond our own borders. From your position crouched snugly within my dust basket, you can imagine me lying in bed in winter beneath several thick blankets. The voice of my mother comes from downstairs. It is 6:30 and I must open the gas station at 7:15. The pump too has a hose attached to its body, the Bensenslange, as our Norwegian friends call it. I drag myself from beneath the covers, pull on my bathrobe, and plod down the carpeted stairs leading to the first floor. Still largely asleep, I navigate my way to the kitchen, where my mother is putting my luncheon meat sandwiches in resealable plastic bags, and I say to her, without even thinking, the Ark of the Pontoon is the conscience of our people. Both my mother and I are startled. That sentence contains no fewer than 3 words I have never before uttered aloud. You can imagine how things proceeded after that, the irresistible momentum that carried me from that moment until this. And it is inarguable that rigorous testing has established beyond question that vacuuming can kill 100% of infant fleas and as many as 96% of adult fleas. A lot of my work has interesting facts, so there's always an educational tangent or element. This is called The Crowd. This actually comes from a recurrent dream of mine. One particular image of it. There was an explosion of heat, and there was wind that blew hard through his wiry hair. When he opened his eyes, he saw that he stood at the base of a ladder. He began to climb. Soon, on reaching one hand up, he felt something soft and giving. It was like a bellows or perhaps a stomach. As he climbed, it gave way, and he found himself inside it. There was a small seat that molded itself around his thighs and buttocks as he settled into it. Now he wondered who he was. Now the walls of the chamber pressed against him. His breathing necessarily became shallow. Who was this person in whose body he found himself? No, that wasn't right. Whose was this mind suspended in the skull of his body? Something glowed in front of him. He reached forward until his fingertips touched a pale screen. From where he made contact, images began to flow. Shadows gave way to landscapes, then to structures, then to smaller figures who he soon recognized as people. Several women stood on a makeshift stage. They moved in a staccato fashion from one part of the stage to another. He recoiled as the face of one woman filled the screen. He could see the striations in her lips, the fine hairs in her nostrils, the blood vessels on the sclera of her eyes. That was the educational part there. He touched his own lips, skimmed his nostrils, brushed the surface of his eyes. There was a spark of recognition which he trapped within his hand before it could become extinguished. Now the screen went dark and sank back into the soft wall, and he peered down at his closed fist. The faintest glimmer showed between his fingers. He grasped the next rung of the ladder and pulled himself to his feet, began climbing again. He emerged from the top of the chamber and felt cool air flow past his cheeks like a stream. He opened his closed fist, and all that he had done, everything he had built and created and decided and achieved and failed at, all of it drifted into the air, became windborne. Now he was separated from his own actions. Now he felt a lightness. Some time passed. He could feel it through his thinning hair. An expansiveness formed in his chest and propelled him. Now he was moving through scenery, buildings, mailboxes, trees, fire hydrants, riverbeds. He rolled down the window and watched carefully. A light changed from one color to another color, and a mass of people began to surge forward. He looked for himself among them. And this, I'm going to read this only because I like the title. It was written while listening to John Ashbery's flowchart being read aloud. It's called Conniption Sauce. I am enthralled as I sink, nose first, into a daily miracle on the side of a confused hill over which teem a corridor of tender knives. I am the inventor of Conniption Sauce. The costume I wear is that of my worst enemy peering into a billowing funhouse mirror. Did it ever occur to you that you were born into a wet barn on a cruise ship? I don't know if it's even true, but it's a fact. My teeth clench my heart. Do yours? I'm sorry. I gave you the slip on the edge of whatever happens to be Main Street. A number of gargoyles still love you, even though you are so-so. The incoherent part of my reading is now over. Every year on January 1st, I've been doing it for about 25 years or so, I write a poem that day, and then I used to mail it by mail. Before that, I would send it by mule to my various friends, and now I send them by email. So if you want to be my email list, on January 1st, you'll get email from me next year. And this was this year's. It's called Zig Zag. Yesterday, the newspaper said one thing. Today, it says something entirely different. And all we did to make that happen was sleep. Today, I looked in the mirror, and I was unrecognizable. A meadowlark with a broken wing. The news is printed on paper, while the meadow is printed on lark. And we focus our camera, a Filmo Sportster manufactured 1947 by Bell and Howell, on it as it zigzags into the air, carrying just one thing under its bum wing, a copy of Company by Samuel Beckett, published 1979 by John Calder. The pollsters find that people want to hear 7 words from Company. The meadowlark, although struggling to remain in flight, complies. Girdle, inkling, confusion, vertex, mountains, hitherto, and furthermore. 7 words of inspiration. Today the people are frightened, but tomorrow they will rise up. Imagine what might be possible. In 1702, when this poem was written, the author was put to death, an enemy of the state. In crafting this translation, I have striven to maintain the vitality of the original. In this way, the frightened people will rise up, probably tomorrow. Imagine what might be possible. I'm just going to read one poem from A Sparrow Came Down Resplendent. It is called Everything. And I'm going to dedicate it to my friend Aidan, who is here. I'm grateful that he is here, so this is for him. Everything. You listen to terrible poetry. I listen to terrible poetry. Rod Steiger listens to terrible poetry. A squashed caterpillar listens to terrible poetry. The town crier listens to terrible poetry. Emma Goldman listens to terrible poetry. The flaming sky listens to terrible poetry. I wrote a poem. I was lonely. I wrote a poem describing how I was lonely. Many a person said I should write a book. The next day I wrote one. I called it Eschew My Feet. It was copyrighted. It made my muscles sore to write it. I went to sleep. I dreamed about everything. When I opened my eyes, everyone became very emotional all at once. Okay, I'm just going to read 3 more quick prose poems here. This one is called El Hindu. I had a bunch of papers to copy. Stories I wrote about things in my life were what those papers consisted of. I went to El Hindu because that place had a copier machine, in addition to books and various stationery products. A man was crying behind the counter. He was the owner, and he was the only one allowed to operate the machine. His white shirt was neatly pressed. His scarred hands were flat on the counter before him. I offered him a slice of apple because its coolness and freshness would comfort him. I had 74 sheets of paper to copy. But the man was upset, and I didn't want to bother him with matters of business. My career as a writer could wait, just as it had waited all my life until now. His tears were gathering in his bushy mustache. Outside, the sun was sinking behind the plaza of the Congress. The electric light in El Hindu made a sound of buzzing and flickered. The man looked at me through his eyes, which were red and glazed. I riffled the edge of my stack of papers I needed to copy. A television was on, but the sound was off. People's mouths moved, but they said nothing. I was particularly nervous. I work as an editor, and so I noticed an edit here that needs to be made, which is in this line here, this clause. The man looked at me through his eyes. He looked at me through his belly button. Like, what is that gonna... That I don't have a pencil on me, but I gotta... If you can remind me after, I gotta cross that out. That sucks. He looked at me through his eyes. He waved with his hand. It's called 49 Cents. This is another one full of important facts. A quick survey of the wreckage indicates that a Norwegian forest cat was piloting the plane, having taken over the controls when Captain Whisper became engrossed in a short early novel by Roberto Bolaño, 1953 to 2003, shortly after takeoff from Trondheim Airport, Værnes. The weather was unremarkable. Shards of the port wingtip and the plane's nose were discovered off the Chilean island Desventuradas, home to 10 species of seabirds and 1 land bird, discovered by Juan Fernandez on November 6, 1574. The island, not the land bird. The cat, the flight's sole survivor, declined to give interviews to Televisión Nacional. When I was a child, a man approached me in the Coles bookstore in Yorkdale Mall and offered to buy me a collection of Andy Capp comics created by British cartoonist Reg Smythe, 1917 to 1998. I thanked him and declined. 30 minutes later, in Kresge's department store, I bought my mother a blue brooch for 49 cents. In 1970, 49 cents was equivalent to $3.07 in today's currency. She told me the man in the bookstore was planning to kidnap me. Not long before my mother died, she said the blue brooch was her most treasured piece of jewelry. Not being kidnapped sure was a relief. And the last poem in this bunch of poems also takes place in a mall. I did not plan that. 2 mall poems. This one's called The Food Court. You could get anything down there in the food court. Egg rolls and chicken balls, spaghetti, banquet burgers, pizza with pepperoni, tuna sandwiches, souvlaki. It was like you had the whole world at your fingertips, my dad used to say. You could travel from continent to continent without ever getting on a plane. So Murray and Ken went down the escalator first because I was moving slower since my arms were full. I was still near the top when they reached the bottom, and I saw them step out into the food court and look around, their eyes wide. On the escalator, which was moving stairs, you could just stand there, not moving your feet. And then you would be downstairs. But I guess the problem was I was a bit impatient, eager to catch up with Murray and Ken, and I took a few steps down and stumbled a bit, and I dropped everything. I watched it all bounce down the moving stairs of the escalator, my book bag, my records, and my dad's wooden coffin. Murray and Ken heard the racket and saw all that stuff coming down and me regaining my balance and running after it. The people on the up escalator stared at me as they went past. When I caught up, Murray and Ken each had one end of my dad's coffin. They flipped it. It had landed upside down. I always drop that, I told them. Murray put my records and my book bag on top of the pine box, and we wandered from one food booth to the next. Ken got a tuna sandwich, Murray got souvlaki, and I got spaghetti, which was also my dad's favorite, which was probably why I got it. I showed them my records while we eat, and Murray grabbed the Linda Ronstadt one from my hands and looked at the cover where she was sitting on a bale of hay with her guitar and wearing a bonnet. "She's so beautiful," Murray said. "I hope I get a girl like that." Thank you.